Thank you all for attending this evening. Any of you who have attended the last one where we did the scan will see where some of that information plugs into our considerations about our sustainability and effectiveness as an organization. Because in the last meeting, we revealed who we talked to of the other Maple organizations, and some of the learnings reappear here in this presentation. So John, let's move that forward. You've probably all seen this. This is basically lays out the strategic planning process. We're in phase 1. Phase 2, some of the background work has happened. We've delayed the face-to-face until September for a number of reasons. And then over the summer and the fall period, we will do some writing aspects of the strategic plan with further conversations with membership. And this is going to be one of the areas that we're going to have to for sure have further conversation with the membership on. John? So this is the group who have participated in various forms and fashions throughout the January-February period. Brian, Ray, Steve Duff, Martin Innes, myself, Jack McFadden, and Bob Snyder. I'll indicate to you that Bob has actually done some work that does not yet appear in this PowerPoint presentation because we started to noodle around some potential committee structuring and this type of thing at the provincial level, but we thought it was a bit too early to sort of present that stuff. It may well appear when we have conversations with people about how best to put ourselves together to do the best job possible for our members. Let's roll forward one more time. So what we're going to do is explain what financial sustainability means and effectiveness as it pertains to this, this work we've done. We're going to introduce a diagram, which you're probably going to see come up again as we move to the next stages, not so much in the future scenarios type work, but in the actual strategic plan. We will compare Ontario to other Maple jurisdictions, and we'll also look at some of the other agricultural commodity groups. Now, some of this information will have been in the last webinar we did last week, but we will actually have shortened it somewhat for this presentation. What's something that is new that nobody's seen or very few have to this point are a look-see at our locals, which very greatly, widely, very widely in their size, both from a membership perspective and from a production perspective, and how they are performing as locals as a unit, as a local unit. And then there's some thoughts and conclusions, and the next steps are going to be where we're going to have to get into some much more deeper conversations with people across the province on. Next slide, John, please. So financial sustainability for the purpose of this group is refers to sources of revenue, including not just membership, but also government sources. And then making sure that we choose the right expenditures that give us the best return on investment, including the right investments into human resources. And so one of the reasons why we looked at other places to see how they have generated revenues and how they've allocated it to various expenses, including in human resources. So the objective here, why we did this, is what's working well in other Maple regions and other Ontario agricultural organization that we may want to adopt, or lessons we can learn from them to avoid some things that didn't work out so well. Next slide, please. Effectiveness is identifying, for our working group, is identifying the actions and the governance structures that yield the highest positive impact for OMSPA, sort of reducing unnecessary burden and increasing positive impact from the most rewarding actions. So it's focusing on what we should do with the resources we have so that they're focused at the most impactful things. Again, what is working well in other Maple organizations and other agricultural organizations. So that's what we mean by financial sustainability and effectiveness of OMSPA. It's making sure that we focus on the most rewarding things based upon what we've observed. Next slide, please. This is a diagram maybe some people have seen, but it's basically the flow of dollars, the relationship between each piece and part, and the benefits and services that OMSPA may give to members. So if you see this, it will come again, you'll probably see this at the start of the strategic plan, where we'll talk about things like membership dues, which of course bring funds into OMSPA. We'll talk about other revenues. You've seen that carbon credits was there. It was something that of course came up in the climate change working group. We've seen how other maple organizations and other farm organizations have run programs previously run by government, but get administrative fees to do that. The objective of that is it adds additional staff, just in the same way as it did within New Brunswick, for example. Not saying we're going to adopt New Brunswick's way of doing it exactly, but we're going to explore things in the way they explored it as well. As you see, there's a double line between the consumer marketplace and ourselves, which is a double flow of information and messages back and forth, which of course the product differentiation and market development group looked at. We've seen a number of working groups looking on providing services and benefits to members, and which is an outflow to members. And we know that we're going to have to take on a greater role and relationship with the government itself, to make sure that the environment is right, and that's the policy environment, the regulatory environment is right, and take leadership on developing that so that we're not just handed something we can't work with, and so that our members will succeed in being able to access markets which reward them for their efforts. And when we talk about partnerships, there may be a greater opportunity there if with the right plan, the right explained reasons for things, which is what the strategic plan is about, is to get additional funding to carry on the next piece of work we need to do. For example, in the product development and product differentiation and market development group, they've suggested they need to bear down much heavier than we've ever borne down on understanding the nuances of the markets and dicing and slicing it so that we're putting our efforts into getting to the right people who have the funds available to afford our products, our premium products. So you'll see this reappearing. I just thought I wanted people to see it for the first time, even though it was actually the diagram that I think that John and I put together way back in the middle of 2021 to start thinking about what type of working groups we would need to have to be able to explore what may be of value to OMSPA as it moves forward. Next slide, please, John. So comparing jurisdictions, this is a fast one, just go to the next one. We looked at production base, number of members, annual guaranteed government contributions, budget for membership fees, and guaranteed contributions. I might have doubled up on that somehow. Staff numbers and board numbers. So let's go to the next one, please. If you were involved in the presentation last week, you see the relative sizes of the various regions. Ourselves in New Brunswick are approximately the same. It depends on the year, who's ahead. At this point, we see that New Brunswick, though, if they get that extra crown land, will emerge rapidly. But each of them have a particular organizational structure, particular governance, particular funding model, etc. So on average, Vermont is about 3.5 times of what Ontario and New Brunswick is at the present time. So it gives us an idea. You say, well, you know, here's what their structure is, here's what the human resources are, but to do what type of job for how much production. So let's go to the next one, please. So here we are. And then you say, well, okay, so you can have big production and not many producers, thus it requires different resource base. We have roughly 600 producers in OMSPA. New Brunswick has 150 producing as much as us or maybe slightly more depending on the year. Nova Scotia has 50, Maine 180, New Hampshire 350, Vermont about 1,000, and New York 550. Now, these numbers have shifted a bit depending on when you ask the question, because some of them had a hard time renewing membership, but that gives us a relative size of, from a membership perspective of what their organizations have to deal with from a population perspective, population of members. Next slide, John. Their budgets, like this is the core budget without, core budget from membership fees and from guaranteed funds from government. Now, the thing about it is you have to go all the way to the right-hand column before you start seeing the impacts of guaranteed monies from government. In New Brunswick's case, of course, they manage two programs for the government, one program for the government of New Brunswick and one program for the government of Canada. And these are programs of benefit to the maple industry. They get administrative fees to do that. In the case of New York, they have their annual fees, but they get a statutory grant, which means it just happens without them applying for it, of $225,000 from the New York government. It's written into law that they get a certain contribution for education, promotion, and communications annually for the maple industry. So before they even start the year to try to see what else they can do to generate income above and beyond their fees, they start with quite a war chest to do various things. Next slide, please, John. What we have in staff, Ontario, we have 0.5 of a person, New Brunswick 1.5 persons, and that actually they've told me is afforded to them by the fact that they manage the two government programs. The administrative fees they get for managing those programs pay for the other half person, but it doesn't take that person half their time to do it. So they actually get compensated well for it. And so that part person also adds in activities and efforts into some other parts of the work of the New Brunswick organization. Last week, we explained why Nova Scotia, Maine, and New Hampshire have 0 staff. I'm not going into that explanation right at the moment. Basically, they've got so small, so limited critical mass, etc. They have governance issues in some places. People don't want to be on boards, or the board is so tightly held, it's all in one family's hands, etc. Now, in the case of Vermont, they got 2.25 staff, including people who are able to run their a certain amount of that human resource to run their certification program. But in addition to that, they have all the folks at University of Vermont Proctor who work hand in glove with them. So they're almost as staff, when we don't quite have that same scenario here in Ontario. We have 0.6 of Jenny's time, but she's not as integrated into the association as they are in Vermont. In New York, they have 1.33 people, person years of salary, plus they also, again, have those people that are almost integrated into the organization as staff from Cornell University, and they're associated to Maple Research Centers, one at Arnott Forest and the other one at Uline Maple Research Center. Next slide, please. So here's where it starts getting into our, and probably last week I didn't explain it to the best that I could have, so I've actually added a color code in here. For the size of the organizations in these different jurisdictions, with their number of members, their production, etc., they have at the provincial or state level different number of people on their board. They're not even filling them in some cases. New Hampshire with 8 board members available, 8 board positions available. Nova Scotia with 9, Maine with 11, New Brunswick with 16. Now, they're having difficulty filling them in New Hampshire, Nova Scotia, and Maine for a variety of reasons. But when you start getting to New Brunswick and Vermont, you see that a similar size production entity as Ontario has 16 board members. In Vermont, which is 3.5 times larger than Ontario, they have 17 board members. In New York, which is 150% the size of Ontario from a production perspective, they have 16. And then they have local chapters out there, which represent another 24 board members. Now, in the case of Ontario, we have 22 board members plus 2 exempt people on the board because like the president, the past president, that's 24. 22 plus 2 is 24. Plus we have 11 alternates. And then the balance of the board members out there and the locals, I estimated them as 66 people across the province. I didn't double count them because I've already considered that 2 from each local are already included in the 24, which are the provincial board members. So that gives us a comparison about, you know, the size of our industry and the size of our board. And it's interesting if you compare New York and Ontario. I was talking to the person from New York, Helen Page. They're having some experience with very similar experiences to ourselves, and there's some lessons to be learned there about succession and whatever else. But nonetheless, we have a lot of board members, either provincially or in the locals, in comparison to what everybody else has, and even ones with much larger production base and producer numbers. Next slide, please, John. Here's one, PPAQ. I didn't put them on the graph because they would have shot the heck out of this graph here, but the provincial board of Quebec is 13 people. 1 provincial president plus the 12 regional presidents. They have 12 zones in Quebec. And let's remind ourselves that their industry is 30 times larger than Ontario's. So they manage their provincial endeavors with 13 people on the board. Next slide, please. Other agricultural associations, you've seen this if you were at the meeting last week. Next slide, John. We will look at 2 organization, beekeepers, 7 full-time employees. I think we've talked about that before. 2 are in the membership office and 5 are in technology transfer office, training office, etc. They have their own models, how they make that happen. Again, a close relationship to the government. But their board of directors comprise of 14 members only for an industry that is roughly the same size as ours from an economic output perspective. But they prescribed what makes up those 14 board members. 9 of the 14 must be commercial scale beekeepers, i.e. over 50 hives. Colonies, I guess is the word. The remaining 6 are made up of 1 industry representative, 1 youth representative, and 4 small scale beekeepers or the hobby keepers. So they've divided their board composition based upon partially scale, partially making sure they had industry involved and youth involvement. So it's different than what we've done. Not to say we should adopt it, but it's at least something to consider as to how they've gone about it. What the Ontario Beekeepers Association has said their success has been, it's been based upon running exceptional grant applications, and to the point where only 19% of their revenue comes from membership fees. The other 81% comes from grants grants, I guess, grants and contracts, and so they put emphasis in their board, making sure they have people that understand grant applications, and they put emphasis into their staff to make sure that they have the skill set to reach out and write those grants, find them, get them, win with them. So there we go. Now, we're probably as big or larger than the honey industry. We sort of underreport ourselves because we have a lot of unreported sales in our industry. Beekeeping, they have some unreported sales, but they are tighter surveillance of what they're up to because they have to register their bees, and so they have a better understanding of what their GDP is. They say theirs is 30 and ours is 26 million, but we know that ours is larger. So just put it that way, comparable in size officially, unofficially, maybe a bit larger, but look at that number of employees, the number of board members, now they've chosen their board members and where they put their emphasis, which is in grant application. Next slide, please, John. The wine growers, 2 full-time employees. They run lean. They run a business that has much larger GDP than ours, and it's comprised of 12 members, and those 12 members include these 4 positions, and also then another 8 that are not holding executive positions. And their executive is elected for 3 or 5 years terms, and that way they don't all come due at the same time. So anyways, it's just an idea of how they've looked at their business, how they've structured their governance, how many people they feel is appropriate to have on a board to be able to make it effective. So that gives us some reference points. John, next slide, please. Our locals, wide variation in size and wide variation in performance. In this particular graph, this is data that John and I sourced out because it has never been sort of captured in this format before. And we did that in 2021 as we were planning for how to approach this whole consultation process, what we needed to look at if we actually got the grassroots application approved and grassroots grant given to us. So what we have here is we'll see that we have from a small size of the number of producers, and that's a particular point in time. It could well be the latest stats on it will be somewhat different in the absolute numbers in each of the locals, but the magnitude changes between them or comparisons between them will not change that much, and the same point can be made. Ottawa Valley with 27 producers and only 7 of them have more than 1,000 taps. And as you go across the way here too, you'll see that, for example, let's look at Simcoe and District. They have only 10 members that have over 1,000 taps, but they have, I think, 56 members in total. The average number of producers, average number of members, there's of the 11, 8 are under the average, and the other 3 make up the larger number, which brings the average up. And you can see, for example, in the case of Wellington Waterloo, 56 members with over 1,000 taps, but 73 members with under 1,000 taps. So you're starting to see in comparisons the difference between the locals. There are going to be some locals that have a high number of larger producers and very small number of small producers, and yet small numbers of membership, and their focus and their issues of concern will be different. And we need to understand this and just sort of say, okay, the other thing we need to, what does that mean from, how to serve various locals, various producers, etc. We have some stats that actually break it out into much more refined size and not just breaking it at 1,000. And when we actually get over a certain number, over 20,000, we only have, I think it's 8 producers in the whole province of members that are over 20,000 taps, and they predominantly occur 4 in one area, 3 in another, and 1 in the other area. So locals, and it's just that that the perspectives are going to be different, and what they need as services are going to be different. But we need to understand what that means where. We also started to ask the question, do you have critical mass when you only have 27 members? And I'm not speaking out of school, but Ray Monenberg would say, we're too small to actually function as a local. And so it's just, you know, there's some stories being told by some of these graphs, these sizes, etc. And there's going to be another one, a graph that comes up later, which tells another set of stories about our locals as well. So would you move to the next slide, please, John? We have the number of TAPs as well. You know, for example, Algoma and District has a small number of members, but they have a great big number of the overall TAPs. And this was a particular point in time, 350,000 TAPs. We go all the way down to, Simcoe and District with 31,000 TAPs, but they have 56 members. We also know that their average size is about 526 TAPs per member. But that's only one metric. I'll show you later where actually Simcoe and District, whereas they're small, they're mighty and outperforming some of the other locals on their activity level. But nonetheless, it's something to be considered. For example, if we say at some point, maybe we don't need 11 locals, we need X number of regional zones or something. If we're going to have some voice which represents members and size of production, at the same time, we got to figure out how we mix and match things and how we set that up, if that is something we want to consider. Let's go on to the next slide, please, John. Here we go. We're pretty, and this is, I think this is one thing on the line, but that's fine, you can understand. Here's also a consideration. Remember, each local has 2 votes. Now, the question then is, how many votes, how many members does it take to get a vote on the provincial board? Well, in the Ottawa Valley, it only takes 13.5 members to get 1 vote at the provincial level. In the Wellington-Waterloo area, for that 1 vote, you have to have 64.5 members. And from a perspective of representation, the way we are personally structured, a geography has 2 votes regardless of how many members they have and regardless of what production they have. Come on and say, oh, this isn't quite right. You know, are we representing the members and the production in an equitable fashion? And I call it a little bit later, I have a word for it, unbalanced. Let's call it unbalanced. There's some unbalance in the way we were structured. I know that in 66, it was based, everything was on geography. If you have a different county name, you had an organization, but the industry's not, the butter on the bread isn't spread equally across the whole slice of bread, i.e. it's not the same everywhere across the province, i.e. the maple industry occurs in greater numbers of people and greater volume of production in different places. Let's look at it from a perspective of not members, but from TAP perspective, which is the next slide, which tells us from a volume perspective, what is the voice of volume? So next slide, John, please. So in Simcoe, it only takes 15,500 TAPs to have 1 vote. In Algoma, now, of course, we know that Algoma has a number of producers, not a lot of not producers in total number, and some of the very large ones, but on average, it takes 178.5 thousand TAPs to get 1 vote. Again, you're starting to see some unbalance here as well. Let's call it that way. I mean, if from a production perspective, Lanark, Wellington, Waterloo, Algoma, it takes a heck of a lot, and even Algonquin, but particularly last year, it takes a heck of a lot of TAPs to get 1 vote. And also you see there's some overlap, it takes a heck of a lot of members to get 1 vote too. So there's an imbalance. So remember, each local gets 2 votes. So this is a calculation of how many TAPs per vote. So make sure that you understand that. So let's move on. They're just making the point that we have unbalanced. Now, John and I more recently compared the financial returns of the locals. And there's sort of 3 different things that I've come to understand about the locals. There's some locals from an income perspective, their revenue is generated by membership fees only. There's some local has membership fees and some small grants. And there's other locals that have membership fees, like everybody else says, some grants and some extra income generating events. And that ranges on a 3-year average, because I had to take a 3-year average because the way we have done our counting in the past, it's all over the place to some extent. And also I want to make sure that, and I did it from 2018, 2019, and 2020. I didn't want to just use the last 2 years as our example, because we know that our levels of activities have been down. So I wanted to, balance it out a bit with some more normal years in there. Nonetheless, it shows the same type of thing. The ones who were not active that much on revenue generating during the pandemic were not active before either. Their behavior was not changed to any great degree by the pandemic. It's the same type of behavior. And what I did find in the pandemic, everybody's a bit lower, but the behavior was the same. And so there is a particular local at general, their revenue annually is 10.2 thousand. And then there's another local, their revenue was 1.8 thousand, which is, the two ends of the revenues. Now, you may not recognize your number in here if you know your number for a particular year, because remember, this is a 3-year average. Also, the expenses vary greatly. Now, revenues come in, and then what do you do with them? And there's those that have expenses that were less than the annual fees, i.e. if you get $1,500 and spend $1,300, that shows a particular behavior. And then there's other groups that's much more, they spend more than what their annual fees are, which is provided by grants or afforded for them to be able to do that by the fact that they generate other revenues. So from a high expenses of 9.9 thousand to low of annual expenses of 1.3 thousand. So you can see when the expenses are at different levels, you obviously got different levels of activity happening in the local to the benefit of members within that local. And so I would say there's a wide range of what's delivered to members from local to local. Let's look at the next piece here, John. The amount of deposits also varies greatly. That means the amount of money that on the balance sheet they have in GICs or in their checking accounts or whatever, the totals of those add up. The highest one was on average for 3 years was 23.2 thousand. And the lowest one was 2.1 on 3-year average. I want to introduce a new concept here, which is coverage ratios. And what a coverage ratio is comparing the amount of deposits you have to the amount of expenses that you have in a year. So other way of saying this, you had no revenue, how long will you be able to operate just upon your savings? And so we have the high of 9.37 years to a low of less than 1 year. Now, what I'm going to say is that just because you have 9.37 doesn't mean hero. It means that you've got a problem. Actually, it means that you are hoarding your members' money and not spending it on them. I'll just put it out there, because both of these extremes are problematic. And when you have a high deposit versus the amount of expenses you have, you spend on an annual basis, you're actually underutilizing significant amounts of funds that should have been used on members. And a low, on the other side there, the low ratio represents an organization that is at financial risk, particularly if the absolute amount is small. For example, if you're used to spending $5,000 a year and you got $5,000 left, you go like, okay, that could be 1 year, but I can do something with shaving those expenses back. But when you have very little in the account, there's only so much you can shave back to be able to last longer. So let me say a coverage ratio isn't, it indicates something. It indicates that you've been hoarding money, or it indicates that you are at financial risk, and you have, if you get a setback for having taken something on that doesn't pan out, you can be in trouble. Let's go to the next slide, John. So I've given 4 examples. Now I've calculated all 11 locals. I did not want to say, oh, case 1 is such and such a local, 2 is such and such, case 3, 4, etc., because I did not want to make an example of anybody in name. We have them, but those discussions should happen with each of the locals privately, not in front of everybody. Case 1, their annual income was 10.2 thousand, expenses of 99,000, and on deposit they had 23.2 thousand. So thus the coverage ratio is 2.34, i.e., $23.2 thousand divided by 9.9. And so here's the other cases. I'll explain them a bit later, but the cases here, we'll get to them as well, but I just want to put them side by side first before we take an explanation. The other case was they have income of 1.8 on average, expenses are 1.3. They have 12.3 on deposit, and so their coverage ratio is 9.37. So that means they've actually been not using the money that they should have been using on their members. Again, case 3, 2.9 is their income, 2.4 is their expenses. And sorry, I mistyped this, but deposit 2.1. The coverage ratio is 0.88. So that is a wrong figure there. It's not 0.08, it's 0.88. And so you can see that it's less than 1 year's worth of expenses. So if something goes amok, they don't have much resilience to fall back on funds. So we'll get that changed, John, for the actual presentation that goes on the website. In case 4, 6.4 income, expenses 5.8. They have 13.4 thousand on deposit. So their coverage ratio is 2.31, which is similar to case 1 from a coverage ratio perspective, but the numbers are different. I'm not saying that 2.3 something is the right coverage ratio. I'm just saying that in comparison to the other 2, case 2 and 3, there's different lessons to be learned. So what you learn from case 1 is it exhibits an ability, that particular case, to generate funds significantly beyond membership fees. Obviously, the membership fees is not 10.2 per year. It has a critical mass of activities for members, indicated by the expenses, which also take volunteers to deliver those. So it means they have good volunteerism. Has financial resources also to undertake large expenditures, such as undertake a summer tour without significant risk, and has reasonable coverage ratio. And because of this coverage ratio and the total amount of deposits, can take on new benefits and services to members a bit as on a pilot basis. So they have more latitude to do various things. Let's go to the next slide. Case 2, remember, there's the income, there's expenses, there's deposits, coverage ratio 9.3. It exhibits limited ability to generate funds beyond membership fees because they don't have a big income, offers a low level of activities for members, and has, in this case, an excessive amount of deposit, thus an extreme coverage ratio. So this particular local has different problems. It probably has volunteer issues, and it's not using the money effectively to deliver services to the OMSPA members within their geographic boundaries. Case 3, again, 2.9, 2.4 on deposit, 2.1 here. This is a proper coverage ratio here, 0.88. It generates some revenue beyond its membership fees because that 2.9 is beyond its membership fees. It offers a level of activities to members within their means. I mean, they're not spending $5,000 a year versus their income of $2,900 a year. Has limited absolute amounts of funds on deposit. Thus, they have a low coverage ratio, and at the same time, because of that, a low level of financial risk tolerance. And so if something goes amok, those deposits can be eaten up really rather quickly. Case 4, I said I wasn't going to identify anybody, but you have to guess who this is. 6.4, 5.8 on deposit, 13.4, and cover ratio of 2.31. They generate obviously a significant income beyond their membership fees, offer a high level of benefits to their members, thus it takes volunteers to do that. And it has significant amounts on deposit to undertake new initiatives. And how I would call this is one that punches above its weight because it's the smallest local from a production perspective. And I won't say which one that is, but if you look back in the PowerPoint, you'll know who it is. And so it doesn't mean because you're small, you can't perform well. It just means that you may miss critical mass at certain times. But, as long as the volunteerism is good, you can offer good services to your members. Thank you. Let's move on to the next slide. This is a bit of a side note to the financial reporting, and John and I and Frank discussed this. From our Constitution, it says that a grant of 20% will be given to each of the locals once an annual financial statement and an annual report is provided. The Constitution does not specify the quality or the detail of the financial report, nor does it really say what level of expected performance there should be before 20% grant is released to the local. Right now, if your local raises $1,000 worth of memberships, you'll get 20% of that, etc. If they raise 10,000, still 20%. But what I found, and John found as well, was that when we were doing the financial analysis, we had such a wide range of reporting. We had handwritten jot notes of income and expenses. We had photocopies of bank statements only and say, hey, we're up this much from last year, or we're down this much, with no explanation. And we had all the way to statements which were prepared by accountants. Not full audits. Nobody requires a full audit by the size of their operation, but reviews by accountants. And I would suggest that we need to help our locals provide appropriate reporting, and for a number of reasons. We should help them with a standard format that they can populate electronically by putting numbers in. Because if we were audited by OMSPA as a total organization, for whatever reason that might be, though our accounting processes and practices would be put in question, particularly because of the information we get at the local. And again, a common format that's easy to fill out can simplify future analysis and future comparisons that would help us manage our organization better, etc. We want to try to raise the water for all ships. And that was sort of a side note to having looked at the financials. And so that was one of the recommendations that isn't specifically about financial sustainability and effectiveness, but is related to it, that we need to help our locals provide better financial information to the center here. John? Health of locals, which is their ability to service members and do governance. Critical mass, let's understand that it's the absolute number of members is one component of it, and the other one is the volunteerism amongst the members. And that is missing in a number of locals, which I saw by the analysis, but I've also seen by what I've seen happening in reports. And they're unable to offer the full degree of services that other members of OMSPA would get in different regions of the province. So your OMSPA membership buys you much more services in some areas of the province than it does in others. It buys you the same amount of provincial services and support, but it doesn't buy you the same amount of local support. And so, and one of the things that comes out of that, we may need to help provide more things centrally, such as training, which is developed centrally but offered locally, because sometimes the volunteer numbers are not there, and the critical mass of numbers are not there on the local executive or whatever, or in the association. It may be hard to undertake something from scratch, like developing a program. What I've also learned is some locals aren't able to fill their local board completely, nor their executives. And that is a sign of something. We saw that when we looked at Maine, New Hampshire, and Nova Scotia. They have the same. They have issues that are the same issues that that some of our locals have, which is lack of interest, lack of volunteerism. In some cases, I think this may be, and I won't say where and who and how, but let's think about it, that some of the board is held too closely to friends and people you know, versus trying to broaden out the perspective. I'm not saying who, what, but that may be something to look at it. What really shocked me is that more than half of the locals do not have a constitution. And how do you know if you're doing a good job and doing it right? If you don't have a constitution to refer to, and just because you had one at one point and you haven't been able to find it for 10 years, it's just as if you don't have a constitution, Frank. So, and I'm giving you a hard shot there, Frank, but a lot of our locals do not have constitutions. And a constitution is basically for you to be able to make sure you're doing the right things and keeping things in line. And making sure that if somebody says, oh, they've done X, Y, and Z, that's not right, you have something that shows that this is what our objectives were from a constitutional perspective, and here's how we've met our constitution, here's how we've stayed in line with our constitution. Next slide, please, John. And based upon participation in this year's AGMs, this last spring, I'm come to believe that proper governance does not exist, or if there has been something, it's not been followed. A common issue that I noted was that business decisions and election of new board at AGMs was being undertaken without even having a quorum in place. And Frank, you attended those with me as well, and we go like, well, basically the board is legally not a board because they don't even have a quorum to elect people here too. So that's without a lack of following governance and without a constitution, some of the things can happen. Now you say, oh, well, so what? You know, it's just a volunteer organization. That being said, the thing we need to be concerned about, it's an insurance issue. OMSPA insurance covers property and personal liability at events run by the locals, as long as you let us know that something's happening in your local. But it does not cover board of directors liability. The only board of directors liability, the only board that has liability coverage insurance is the provincial board, because we are an incorporated entity. The locals are unincorporated associations. And this will become increasingly important as the government of Ontario tightens up on the governance of not-for-profits in the next year and a half. I think by October 24th, 2024 or something like that, 20th, 2024, there's a tightening up here. And I know that OFA is really quite concerned. Their local chapters, their local federations are really concerned that they may be at risk. Personally, that actually they're guaranteeing what they do at a board level by the value of their farms, and thus it's a personal risk. Now, and the thing is that you go like, oh, if something happens and somebody says, well, what's your governance structure? Where's your minutes? Where's this? Where's that? And you don't have them in place, you know, you're liable, but you're super duper can't protect yourself if you don't have a constitution and are following proper governance. And I'm sorry to say, but too many of our locals do not have a constitution and are not following proper governance. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. Here's some conclusions. There's not many more slides here. OMSPA is understaffed. It should be at least 1.5 people based upon other jurisdictions like New Brunswick. We're 0.5 officially. John's putting more time than that in. We believe, for example, if we take on something like Applied Research and Training Center, the Maple Applied Research and Training Center, we need a person to run that, and that would be likely on top of it, and the revenue will have to come from a third-party source, i.e. not our membership, to do that. And so, you know, there may well be more than that needed depending upon what we take on. The other conclusion is our governance structure is bloated. It's too big for the size of the organization, and it's quite unbalanced from a representation perspective, from both of the measures of number of members in each of the geographic locals and by the number of tap/production in each of those areas. And my analysis suggested OMSPA locals are, a number of them underperforming, but this was also caught, this whole message was caught in the membership survey when people were being asked, members were asked, how relatively important is your local? And some were answering important because they were getting services and others were not. And it was interesting, the local as an importance factor was way down on the list. And so it's, you know, that our members survey caught what we were catching by this analysis as well. Next slide, John. So we have noodled over a number of things as saying, well, if there were regions, where would they be? Who would be in which region? How do you balance taps? How do you balance members, et cetera, just sort of a, you know, what if? And additionally, Bob, who's also on the governance committee, you know, if one was to say, what would the activities of OMSPA provincial be, and what were the activities the locals be, and what were the shared responsibilities? We got a chart for that. And the thing is, what I just want to say is that we've started to think this over, but we don't want to think about it in a vacuum. So in the remaining phases of the strategic planning process, we need to undertake a more detailed discussion on this restructuring of OMSPA. And the objective, of course, is to provide better service to our members, all members, so that regardless whether you're in location A or location B, you're getting the same service as much as possible. And not only just provincial type things delivered, but the local type delivery things, with the objective overall of strengthening and growing our industry in Ontario. I believe the last slide is the same as all these presentations, which is, you want to get in touch about these type of things, contact John and we'll work on it. So those are my my comments for now. John, I'd also sent you, I believe, the one slide from Bob Snyder, which if you start thinking all the things that OMSPA provincially and locally do, how would they relate to each other? And I'm not saying this is something that we've already taken and carved in stone. It's just you have to start somewhere for a discussion purpose. I don't know whether you remember that one. I just thought, since I talked about it, you just may.
I have it. Yeah, I'm just gonna get out of this. And
it's not really a slide deck. It is a it's just one page.
It's a little awkward to share because it's split between 2 pages, but
oh, is it?
Just I think it's to do with
because it was only one page. Oh, okay. Let's see what you got there.
Actually, hang on. I might be able to change that. I think it might have been put on you know, not portrait but landscape instead of.
Yeah. Okay.
Hang on. Let's see. Can't always find these things when you want. Page orientation. There we go.
If you can get it.
Yeah, there we go.
That's fine. If not, we can move on.
For some reason, it was in landscape, so that's still a little It's a little better anyway.
Okay, let's just put it up. And so we're not going to debate it. We're not whatever, but oh yeah, that doesn't really work too much. Anyway, sorry, but let's not waste too much time on it. But what it basically does, it lays it out into 5 columns of undertakings. And it has various things that, oh yeah, it's on, okay. Okay, yeah, that's the top part of it. Anyways, let's not worry about it. But really what it does, it has all of the undertakings we do either as a provincial organization or a local, and what are the shared things, what are the solely led things, etc. And it's one place to start about figuring how best do we deliver these things. Anyway, let's just ditch that because, well, yeah, you can see down here.
Yeah, there's the rest.
It's split between 2 pages for whatever reason. And so we'll just leave it for now, but it will be, let's say, used as a starting point for discussions when we get into the, how do we organize ourselves best, deliver the top-notch services and grow our and support our sector. And we've even taken a provincial map of Ontario and put squigglies on it, but say, wow, this piece might go with that piece and whatever, from a perspective of, because I think at one point, sometimes just because you say this county, that county, next county, sometimes that's not the way the world works. Because if there's a bunch of mountains between it, and the valleys on the other side work better together than they do on, in the mountain area or whatever. And so it's not always the best way to divide things up by county lines. There's trading patterns and whatever else, but I'll leave that one alone. And let's ask questions.
Frank, you made some comments in the chat. Did you want to explain?
Yeah, so with a few things, definitely on the accounting procedure, and as Randall suggested, even in Eastern Ontario, our accounting procedures are horrible, absolutely horrible. And I'll talk about the Constitution at the same time. Supposedly we had a Constitution. Where it is, nobody knows. Historically, 50 years ago, we had one, and it's probably in the bottom of somebody's drawer, sock drawer, hid away for never to be seen light of day again. So at a provincial level, I think at this point, if we move forward with having 11 locals yet, that we could, it'd be our duty as a provincial board to supply the locals with a standard accounting form that they could all fill out. And I think we'd be very grateful for that, because a lot of us do not have an accounting background. And the other thing with the Constitution, we could prepare a standard Constitution for all locals to have and archive it at the provincial level. So it'll always be evergreen for every future president and board in years to come. Those are the 2 things that I'd like to talk about now. Maybe one of the recommendations coming out of this, that we go from 11 locals down to maybe 4 regions. And just let me explain that thought pattern. Even on my personal level, I'm an IBW contractor owner, in other words, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and they have 11 locals across the province, and they find it's inefficient, not working, have different constitutions, have different accounting problems. And if I didn't know better, I just took out the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and put maple syrup producer in there. We'd be talking about the same issues. And they're looking at moving across 4 regions across the province. And I said, great idea. Maybe something that we should be maybe looking at, and take the best of the people and go from there. But that's food for thought in the future. At this point, that's all I can say in that end.
The Ontario Woodlot Association only has 5. Now, they're not the same 5 as we would choose, because in some areas where they have a lot of forest, they don't have a lot of maple, but they manage with 5.
So anybody that's on here tonight, any comments to that that idea or structure, or on the accounting and the constitution procedure? Or if you want to talk about the regions,
As far
don't be shy, Jack.
Frank, it's your as president of Eastern. Yeah, I'm all for it. Give out the forms, guys. Bring out the forms. We'll standardize and the way we go. We're all volunteers, and Frank knows some Eastern. One guy is reporting for 2 years as the accountant, and wow, we're getting some reports. And then the other guy may not be as good with computers, but he or she has volunteered and they do the job. And but if we have a form, then we can actually obey by it. And I think that'd be a great step forward.
Yeah. Well, even for example, in Eastern's case, you provided income and expense, but you never provided what your deposit was. And so other people have, and it's like, without that, you don't know the situation really, what your asset base is.
Don't feel bad. We had a meeting last night. And again, you know, the gentleman, you know, he's volunteered and everything else, and he gives us what's in the bank account, but he neglects what we have in our GICs and stuff like that. So he's not giving a true picture of what's going on. So we actually have double the money that what's actually what he stated in the report. So you know, and I think just by doing that, we can show to the province and that we've standardized our accounting principles, and that we can show that, you know, we are doing something to make our locals more efficient. And again, on the Constitution, I think we can do the same thing also. We can standardize the Constitution and submit it to all 11 locals, and then they can adhere to that or make any changes accordingly and come back to the board for those changes.
Just as a interesting FYI, over that 3-year period I looked at, the deposits total out in the locals were anywhere from $105,000 to $125,000 sitting in the locals bank accounts. And as a not-for-profit, you know, when you have that much sitting around, are you spending it on your members the way you maybe should be? You know, they paid in to get something back, and we're not in the business of creating bank accounts earn a small pittance of interest. So it's you know, there's enough, and there's too much, and there's too little, but what is the right amount?
Now, Randall, I couldn't stop myself laughing here. It may be the right time to have lots of money in the bank with the GICs going up. Sorry, I was thinking out loud, but definitely another relationship, Randall, is that the locals that follow a proper turnabouts of their presidents, vice presidents, and a member of the executives probably will have issues reporting versus the ones that are constantly the same for the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. They know the routine inside out, so they probably have good reports, while the ones that don't, that follow, like recycling the president and this and that, probably they have difficulties reporting correctly because they don't know the process. So is that something you've noticed?
It's not sort of cut and dry that way. Particularly if you keep a treasurer, and the treasurers usually don't want to be the president or vice president, but what they do is basically is the bookkeeper, which they can then be able to present that to an accountant to be able to get in the right format. Now, that's going to cost you some money. You have to be significantly sizable to do that. But that's part of the challenge here, is that when you're operating a small local with small budget, small income, are you going to pay some of that for an accountant? No, but maybe that's part of the problem. We have, our entities are too small to operate professionally.
Okay.
And what I mean by professionally is just sort of that higher level of accountability, because it's going to be forced upon us, regardless of whether we want it. The agricultural sector is the last portion of the not-for-profit associations to be molded into a higher level of performance. And if anybody's an OFA member, they'll probably have heard how the OFA federations, the local ones, are scurrying and over the next year and a bit to get themselves into better shape. Because, you know, there's too many not-for-profits have operated loosey-goosey, and there have been problems both ways for the people on the boards of those things, but also when something goes amok, whoever's been injured or who's ever been faulted or whatever.
So Randall and Frank, is Frank still there? Yeah. Can we have a form for this year? Like, I'd go for that as a quick win, you know, for at least a financial. I'm looking at myself as a president, but I have no insult. There's just Frank here tonight. Older guys that me that have been there longer, but yeah, it's just that we rely on them to have the right thing.
It's a part of the culture too of an organization. You know, it's not a one-person show or a small group show. It is actually an association, and it's good to move people around in it and to bring in new blood. But if you don't have a constitution or don't follow proper procedures, you have nothing to anchor the changes.
But I'm looking mainly for finance. Let's start with finance.
I think we can do that, Jules, pretty easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish give out something that we can actually hear. This is what you follow.
Yeah. And the thing is, it should be in a format that's you can fill in by word processing in the numbers or whatever. Get away from handwritten things that are extremely hard to
read.
John scans some stuff, sent it to me. I go, I'm not sure what this says. John, what does this say? I don't know. That was 3 years ago. I've forgotten if I ever knew at that time, was able to read it. But the thing is, that could be a fault, you know.
Frank wanted to say something. Frank, you're on mute. I saw you talking.
Thanks, Jules. Yeah, no, I'm just saying to John, I said it's something we can maybe bring up at the next board meeting, and maybe we can give the accountant a call and just get a draft sent up. That'll probably take them about an hour to do.
Yeah, there's actually a good one I might run by them from that Algonquin has used. That's and see if he would find it acceptable. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
A local that I'm quite familiar
Mhm.
with actually prepares budgets annually with rationale as to why certain things need to be spent for certain things. I'm just saying that there's a different level of a wide range of sophistications across, but what I'm going to say is that also means that maple syrup producers can do it. Maple syrup organizations can do it, because if some can do it, all could do it in some form or fashion.
So there's a lot of good ideas, Randall, coming out of this, and a lot of room for debate on how we're structured and how we're going to have representation and how our finances are going to look at. It was quite surprising to know that you got like $125,000 in revenue and all the locals that maybe could be used better. So anyways, there's probably a lot of future debate on this whenever the phases get done, and be some room for thought how we're going to move ahead.
There's also money at the provincial level that could probably be used better too as well. There's more than 1 year's worth of on deposits in comparison to our annual revenue too. So these type of things
Maybe
need to be looked at as to
maybe not after this year.
Right. But they need to be looked at as to, what's the highest and best use of funds at any particular point. So
And Randall, remember, like now Quinty's got the summator, so the normal expenses are going to kick in now, and that money should be well spent, on training and other stuff coming up. The pandemic kind of screwed us up over a bit there.
Yeah, but realize that the summer tours only kick out so much money, and they're split 50-50. And so it doesn't bring in gobs of cash.
Jack, you have something to say?
Yeah, can we talk for a second about communicating? There's been a lot of good work done. You shared some options, recommendations, Randall. Can you tell me where are we going with communication on this committee and the other ones as well? Where I'm coming from is that first go round, there was a lot of apprehension about what might happen, a lot of negative comments about rumors that are going around. How are we going to make sure that the members take the time to input so that before this thing rolls out in the way of specifics, your next phase, how do we make sure there's a clear understanding of what's being developed in this phase? How do we ensure people comment rather than saying it's on the members' website, go take a look, make a comment to John if you have anything? Is there something more we can do to try and get a better grasp of where all this work is going in this committee and in the other reports too?
Yeah, again, this is the last official function of phase one tonight. All 10 working groups has reported. Phase two, the background work has happened. We will be holding some meetings across the province in the second and third week of September. But that's more future forward looking, meaning that if these scenarios happen, how do we prepare ourselves to take the best advantage of them? So it's sort of planning. But the whole taking and putting it into a cohesive package that can be a straw man for people to look at, so they don't have to go and look at each one of these presentations. I mean, will happen over the summer months and in the early part of the fall as well. And then we'll take that on the road. Because people have will say, oh, I'm really interested in such and such thing you've covered in the proposed strategic direction, which appears in the strategic plan. But how did you get there? Well, we can say that information, if you really want to dig deep on it, you can look on the reports or the PowerPoint presentations or talk to some of the committee members. But we have to have a phase where we have the cohesive interrelated pieces in front of people. And that's work we need to do and then take it on the road for input.
Final
Nick.
comment, different subject. I'm really pleased with what I see in looking at the functional analysis, the number of units, etc. One of the things that's been core for OMSPA effectiveness has been local initiatives, local drive, local enthusiasm. And I'd hate to think that anything done in redesigning the geography or the roles and responsibilities would take away from that thrust at the local level. That's where our members are. That's where the action should take place. There's a great many things which can be done corporately, from strategic planning to handing out forms that make it easier for us to operate at the local level. But I just want to make sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one with the reduction in numbers of local members. Let's make sure that the heart and soul of OMSPA is in local ideas and generation accumulated at the provincial level, but let's not water down the role of the locals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll put it this way, and I won't give names of the locals, but I would put 4 of them on my watch list that would be close to collapsing or have a higher potential of collapsing as an entity over a period of time. And it's how do we make sure that the service to the people within that geographic area doesn't follow the demise of the organization itself, right? That's in that area too. So how do you make sure that the members get all they can get and it's equal everywhere? Because some of our locals have got to a critical mass level that they can't provide the support to their members in the way that other ones can. And so how do we address that? So which parts need to be done centrally, which needs to be done regionally, et cetera, that we're able to reach out to various places.
I'm just going to make a quick comment on that. And then I see Nick Bresniak has his hand up. I'll have Nick speak there for a minute. But Jack, we could still go to a regional aspect and have the best talent out of say there's three or four locals in that region, have the best talent run that local and still keep the local identity inside each one of those regions, so that you do still have the same functions. It's just that you would operate more efficiently at the governance level and at the financial level, and you would actually probably have more money to do more activities amongst, say you had 4 locals in that area, you could still reconfigure it a little bit and still be able to supply the services or more services that you did before.
Okay.
Nick, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just a comment on which touched on the comment made by Jack. Yeah, you put the package together, Randall, and you get it ready for the members. My very big concern is to get the members out to a meeting so that they're there in front of you. You're not going to just put up 5 meetings in the province and say, here are the dates, come out and we want to talk to you. There's got to be some sort of an incentive. I mean, look at what we have now for participants. We got 11 people, okay? And all through this, I think I've only missed one of these webinars, and I've been disappointed in the fact that we haven't had a larger turnout. And the people that show up meeting after meeting or webinar after webinar are people that are interested. We've got to make them interested in what we want to tell them. And how do you do it? I mean, a long time ago, when I was a new member, there was a program called the Seal of Quality that you maybe might have heard of. And there was a person called Shirley Hazlitt. She went across the province in a series of meetings, and I 7 or 8 meetings, but she was paid $75,000, and that was almost 30 years ago, to deliver the message. And she got people that came out to the meeting. I mean, if you want people to come out to a meeting and it is important to have their input, you've got to structure these meetings and structure the announcement of the meeting to get them there. Whether you give them free food, free beer, or whatever you're doing, there has to be a hook to get them there, because just wanting them to be there because we want them to be there is not going to work.
Yeah.
First of all, just to answer that, hold on, Randall, just to answer that, Nick, I'll gladly go around the province for $75,000. I'd even share that with Randall, the 2 of us.
I'll go with you, Frank.
Yeah. So, second of all, is that society has changed. Society has changed. What we were 25, 30 years ago, what it is now. So that's the other thing you got to think about. Third thing is, we're on the longest day of the year right now, and if this was January, February, we probably would have 100 people on here right now. So there's people not going to listen to webinar on maple syrup when they can be outside barbecuing, have family, friends, holidays are ready to start, and stuff like that. So that has been one of the problems that we have. Another thing is, with the storm, there's a number of people there, but even in our own local, we had our meeting last night, and I asked everybody around the table, and not one of them, well, we didn't hear about it, or no, we didn't look at our email, or well, maybe we'll catch it in the future. They're just, are they not interested, or are they just got better things to do? I don't know. I think with all the stuff that's going on right now and all the recommendations and everything else, we're being bombarded. And to Jack's credit in saying that, once we get to the end game and all the recommendations are put out, people then will look at that as a complete package. But you're correct. How do we get them out? I think it's up to the locals, the 11 locals. And we'll announce that we're coming into these areas. It's up to the 11 locals to do the work to say, hey, this is important. This is your passion. This is your production. This is your money. This is your whatever you want to call it. And it's up to each local to make sure that we get out there. And if that includes free beer, I'm all in for that. I'm all in.
Yeah, I think
There's also something else that to think about, and it's a good diagram of it. Let's take a canoe, okay? And in the front of the canoe, there's 2 people paddling forward, and in the back of the canoe, there's 1 person paddling backwards, And in the middle, there's 7 people with a stick of wood and they don't even know it's a paddle. And they're just sitting there doing nothing. And so, there's only going to be a certain amount of engagement. You either get the engagement going forward or the engagement going against it. And most people, 70%,
So,
it doesn't
And
matter
Nick-
to them. And I'm not saying they
and Nick-
shouldn't be reached out, but that's the tendencies in most organizations.
and
Yeah,
Nick,
but
you've
there has-
attended
there
all
has to
these.
be- There has to be a relevance to the membership, and that's what really has to be pushed.
Nick, you've attended all of these. I know you have, and thank you very much for that. Tell me, have you learned anything out of this?
Sure.
Have you learned a lot of good information? Have you
Sure.
seen a lot of good information? Have you seen a lot of effort put out by the 70 volunteers that were on this?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And if you sat in front of the screen and didn't get it, you must have been asleep. But that's
Thank you,
because,
Nick. Thank you.
but that's because I showed up.
How about put that in
But-
print? We'll put it into the next e-letter. Nick
Let's
Bresniak.
Yeah.
you
let's
know,
But,
appreciate
let's
that
put that in there
10% of our
because Nick-
members participated in these working groups.
But Frank,
Because
I
Nick,
just,
Nick, Jules, let me finish. So Nick, you're well respected throughout the maple syrup industry, and have done a lot of good things for the maple syrup industry. And it's people like yourself and Doug Cassidy, Bill Vandenberg and Jack McFadden's and Mark and Diane Curl and people, longtime members, you've all taken something out of this. You've all learned something about this. I have learned a ton of stuff, and I take my hat off to all the people who have worked on this. Bob Snyder, the information he's put out. It's indispensable. But we need people like yourself to say, to come up with some, hey, I've attended these webinars. These are fantastic. You should listen to them. You will learn something. You will learn where this organization is going in the future. So it's, talk is cheap. Writing though, and broadcasting this, whether it's amongst your members, Dave Wagler, yourself down there in Waterloo, Wellington, you got 100 members down there. You need to put the word out, and that's how you have to do it. So like Randall and I will show up there with the consultants, and we'll put it all out there for you. But if you don't put the effort in there and all you locals to get your membership out there, what can we say? What can we do? We have put hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours into this. John's almost a nervous wreck from it. So, but it's just that we've done a lot of work here, and you are correct, Nick. We need to get the people out there, and coming in June, July, and August is definitely not the time to do that. September, October, yeah, let's get out there, pound the doors, stuff like that. John and I are heading to Algoma for the first week of October, and Algoma at their AGM had said, hey, welcome to come. They said we always feel left out. That the president and executive director is specifically going to drive up there to hold a board meeting in their local. They're going to work to get their members out there to see how OMSPA works, and that's now that COVID is essentially over. That's what we're working to do, is to get out there. 2 years of COVID has been a little bit detrimental in creating these relationships and networks and all that kind of good stuff. So that's my political soapbox for tonight.
Well, there's also a encouraging sign that we obviously have the reports. They're on the website. Some of them are a written report supplemented by a PowerPoint. Some of them are a PowerPoint, but we also have these webinars. And if I recall rightly, John, there are people going on the website to watch the webinars and to look at the PowerPoint. So it is accomplishing the creation of several types of, let's call it products of information that people can access. Now we just need, what's the next event of information sharing that we need to undertake? We've got some electronic stuff. Now we need some people to people stuff.
I've got the question. Nick is still there. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
he's down there.
Nick,
So Nick,
still there.
yeah, Nick, a comment. How do we get to them? There's nothing better than the website because it's there, it's public. And if anybody complains they haven't heard about it, which John has done a good job every week or every month or whatever. And I'm telling you from the Eastern perspective, every week I will send a newsletter for May. And I always pointed it out, but it makes it difficult once they're not, like Frank said, at our freaking exec. There was only me and him. I felt like, okay, should I get a bat out and, like, and get, why didn't you not listen to this, because you're in the local exec. But my question to you, Nick, is not having, or your executive level at your local, I don't know how it's going, but do you believe the stuff is going out to your members right now, Nick? Are they following? Are you getting any input from them saying, yeah, we're listening, or what's going on down your end in Grey Bruce?
No, I haven't had any information, and I've looked at the participant list every webinar, and I've not seen one person from our local partake other than myself. So it's
Jack, you did have a couple people from your local that contributed significantly to the working groups, and they should be, because of that, champions for the overall, which are Nathan Keeshig and Michelle Sage. So maybe working with them, who already have skin in the game, would be a good place to start in your local.
I feel too that people are busting out after the pandemic, and we would be hitting this problem in a regular time anyway, just as Frank said. The weather's nice, blah blah blah, but I think it's even worse now, just because everyone's been locked down for 2 years, and now we're finally getting a bit of normalcy. So, and we're not used to having so much to do anymore, right? Here, it was easy to get lots of people on the webinars when there was nothing to do, but now people are back into their regular lives. So we will have to figure out how to get through.
And while we were there, Randall, last night, we took a decision that you'll be coming to. So please put down, I can't remember what the date or our info date in November.
19th.
November 19th. You are tied in. And the idea, I believe, Frank, what we're going to say when he comes up, we're going to have to dish out some money and buy a beer to everybody who shows up.
Great idea, Nick. Great idea. I'm really looking forward to it. All right, folks, it's 9 o'clock. And I think we've beaten this to the, any last comments at all? Just comments, no discussion, just any last comments? I see from Jack McFadden, couldn't read more about the excellent work done by a small group of leaders. Hang in there, guys. So let's all hang in there together and let's work together, and we will achieve these goals together. Whether it's a positive criticism or a positive support, we will listen to all. Just remember, we are volunteers like you are, and we get paid the same amount of money as you do. I've asked John for 100% raise. He has agreed to it. So it's been put in the budget. So he says you'll get the same amount as you did last year, which was nothing. So I guess that means I get nothing again this year. So
just have to do twice as much.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody who's here. John, I need you to stay on because Chris Koopman texted me. So I need you to stay on, please.
Sounds good.
And Randall, any last words?
No, that's great.
Other than,
again, I look forward to not working on phase one for now that it's over for me in phase one. I'm looking forward to work on phase two, and I'm already heavy into it. And phase three will start this summer. So I did a little bit of a breather. It's great to do, and I really appreciate people who are on the webinars. Again, let's not get too concerned about the low numbers on the webinars. I think we got up to 27 one time. We were producing a communications tool at the same time, but it's by having the webinars, we will find other ways in which to reach out to people as well. These are good background pieces. What we want to do is dispel the mystery of what we were doing. Like, here it is. This is all the things we thought about. No decisions, but what it was, we turned over a bunch of rocks and looked what's on the underneath them, and want to make sure everybody else saw the same things we were seeing. So thank you.
And some places we found gold underneath. So Randall, thank you very, very much. Thank you for everything. Thank you, everybody, tonight. Good night. Have a great night.